Hi, I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime Magazine. Welcome to another episode of HumanSec, which is all about securing humans. I'm here today with Jim Zuffoletti, CEO and co-founder at Safeguard Cyber, the industry's first and only comprehensive collaboration, chat, and social media security platform. To learn more about Safeguard Cyber, visit safeguardcyber.com. Also joining us is Paul Connelly, Vice President and Chief Security Officer at HCA Healthcare, where he's been for around 20 years. Paul's former positions include CISO for the White House Communications Agency for 8 years, as well as an information security analyst at the NSA for 5.5 years. Jim, great to have you back with us.
Great to be back.
Paul, welcome. Great to have you again as well.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Jim, to kick off, I have to ask you a question I asked you once before, and it's still rattling around in my head. I find this so interesting. There is so much industry talk about humans being the weakest link and creating human firewalls, if you will. You know, none of us can argue with that. Such a fixation on training employees around phishing scams and social engineering. That's so important, but why is there such a lack of security around communications tools and apps that these employees use every day?
Yeah, so Steve, one of the things I would say is I feel a little bit like a philosopher when answering a question like that, because the starting point is, honestly, humans are messy. I think that's something that information security and security in general sees every day. Humans are they want to be everywhere in terms of their digital life. They want the ability to use all different types of apps that are out there in both their personal life as well as their professional life. And as an overlay on top of that, they also, and I realize these are a lot of generalizations, they don't want you in their business. And so at the same time, as an organization, that you've got to accommodate this kind of human desire to use all these different new tools, you also have to figure out a way to manage the risks and do that in a way which also respects the human requirements for privacy that are out there. And the other side of the equation is that the attacks that we're seeing, particularly several of them in the last couple of weeks, are attacks that are increasingly multiple platform oriented. They come in one platform, they go out another platform, and they are subtle. And so the challenges are not just how do you defend this, fickle human being, again, thinking like a philosopher, but also how do you protect it against an adversary that is getting more and more sophisticated in terms of their means of attacks? And that's really kind of the rub there. Humans want to communicate through all these different ways, and adversaries recognize that and are exploiting that.
So, Paul, I'm so interested to hear what you have to say on this topic. We speak to a lot of CISOs and CSOs at large enterprises, and when we ask open-ended questions, we inevitably are talking about enterprise applications. Not to say that's not mission critical, it is, but rarely do they volunteer a discussion around LinkedIn and Teams and Slack and Zoom and the types of tools we're talking about today. So I'm curious, what are your observations? What do you hear from your peer group of other CISOs and CSOs?
Well, I do think it's a common challenge, and maybe on the user side, there's maybe a little bit of belief that this is small amounts of data and it's perishable, and therefore it's not that big a risk. But as Jim just said, it clearly is a risk. And I think, like so many other situations that we face in this field, the key is balance. We know that these tools can help people be more productive and innovative, and they may help us collaborate with partners who are outside of our walls. So those are all good things that we don't want to get in the way of. But we've got to find a way that we can do it within a framework that provides some level of control so that we don't bring risk to the organization. The things that we worry about are we really lack visibility on what's happening in these tools. What data is being disclosed, where's it going, who has ownership of it, questions like that. They clearly create a new vector that can be used for whether it's social engineering or introduction of malware, other types of attack. And there may not be any vetting that goes into them. I mean, it's so easy to just go out and grab one and download it and start using it. So that's part of the challenge with this whole idea of shadow IT and these kinds of tools where they, with the best of intentions, they can do good things. They're readily available. You don't have to go through your IT organization and start using them. So you can quickly end up where you've got dozens of tools, and some may overlap and do the same thing, but don't cooperate with one another. Who knows about licensing? Are they supported? And then the whole layer of security risk as well. So yeah, I think it's a significant concern.
Jim, I want to ask you about a very interesting survey that was published by Safeguard Cyber. According to the survey, and it's out on your website, 52% of CISOs report that the biggest challenge to maintaining security and compliance communications is the use of unsanctioned apps. So two things. One, if you could just give us some context on that risk. And second, how do you define unsanctioned apps?
Yeah, so a lot of this very much echoes what you were just talking about, Paul, where you have this dynamic within enterprises where you have all of these tools that are available. They're available with such a low bar to adoption, and in fact, they've even been engineered to be virally adoptable within an organization. Just think about I think about a platform like Slack. And how Slack has worked its way into its organization. So when we conducted this survey, it was, as you think about all the different things that are demanding attention of an information security professional, hitting that level of kind of threshold of the biggest challenge was something that was really eye-opening for us. Is this dynamic, which is application sprawl, if you will. And there's a dimension to it that Paul was referencing a moment ago, which is the ability just to gain visibility and see what's happening across these apps. That's a challenge. And then the second piece is what's actually going on inside those apps from a behavioral perspective, what kind of information is being handled and the like. And so, you've got these apps, they're really desirable. They do all these really great purposes, but they have to be, as we think about sanction doesn't mean that, that they all have to fit kind of a cookie cutter approach, but they all have to be vetted in a certain way in terms of understanding what kind of controls are present or what kind of controls can be exerted over it. And can I meet that visibility requirements that are out there? And can I understand the identity of the person who's using that application as it transits across all these other applications? Because again, cyber threat actors are not targeting just on Slack, for instance. They're really thinking about all those different digital communication platforms that the same person may be on across. And therefore, I come in one way, or I cultivate a relationship in one app, and then I move to other apps because that helps me evade detection. So this is a big challenge, and so I guess in retrospect, we were not surprised, but it was impressive to us that it was such a dominating challenge that the survey respondents cited.
So Paul, clearly this is a challenge, but how big of a challenge? I mean, for large enterprise CISOs and chief security officers, is it on their radar screen? I mean, they're dealing with incident response, preparing for ransomware attacks, trying to train tens of thousands of users, employees in their organization, and the list goes on. I mean, you could give me the list. So, is it up there? Is it something that they're really paying attention to, growing more concerned about, and giving directives to their teams to shore up the security around those tools?
I think it is, and it goes back to something Jim said in his the answer to the first question. It's the the bad guys find a way in through one door, and then they navigate around. So there's you want to limit the number of potential doors that can be used. And as I said before, I mean, people have the best of intentions. It's not, most organizations, you don't have people who are intentionally trying to create security risks, but they all want to get their job done. They want to do it as fast and innovatively and take advantage of opportunities to be efficient and do new and better things. So it's the problem is, as Jim just said, and I said earlier, that it's so easily available. You can quickly become in the situation where it's like, how many holes in the dam can you plug at one time? So you really have to focus across the board. And I agree with another point that Jim made about you can't just have cookie cutter solutions. You can sort of drain the innovation out of your organization if you become the security group that's got these draconian measures where you can't go outside the lines of this box. So It is this balance that I mentioned earlier, and to me it's everything from educating users so that they understand what they're doing when they bring something like this in, and the potential risks that they create, which maybe they weren't aware of, the significance of those risks. And there are some steps you can take to actively block things, or at least detect, so that you can follow up with that user and understand what they're doing, and then discover apps that are in use. To follow the trail of the data that's leaving your organization to discover what individuals are doing, and use that to create a discussion where you're talking with the users and understanding what they're trying to accomplish, and working with legal on licensing and IT departments on support and so forth. So I just think if you can work a cycle like that, where you're part of the solution rather than being the person who's saying no, you get cooperation, and that's a way that you can work together with your users. But I feel like it is a significant issue that companies have got to find a way to work with it. Otherwise, like I said, it can quickly become sort of the death by a thousand cuts.
Absolutely. So, Jim, I want to zero in on social media before we get to collaboration tools and apps. So, very specifically, Twitter, LinkedIn, and what concerns me, I don't know if we're even prepared to talk about it, are unsanctioned apps, social media tools that we don't even know about. New tools on the horizon that, a user is using in the enterprise, and maybe the security team's not even familiar with those. Just how big is the social media threat, and, potential consequences if they don't do something about it?
Yeah, one of the best ways to kind of appreciate the magnitude, if you will, of social media in general is to kind of do a little back of the envelope comparison to email, which is the commonly understood, heavily invested in communication channel in organizations large and small. And then think about it as the size versus social media. And I can't cite you chapter and verse, but I can tell you that the data basically shows that there are more social media accounts than there are email accounts, and that's actually been that case for more than 8 or 9 years at this point. So there was a crossover point that took place in kind of 2012, 2013. And so you could think about it as social media, in a manner of speaking, is kind of like the new email. In the sense of its ability to transmit between a threat actor and a victim, very similar types of payloads that you would see versus email, with a lot of disadvantages, right? In email, if I have control over my email boxes, I have a lot of ability to put multiple layers of protection in place. And with respect to the messaging that takes place with the social media realm, I don't necessarily have any of those protections that are natively available within those platforms. So it's just like email, and yet it is not nearly as protected as email. And then you've got this extra layer, which is in this concept of inauthentic identity. If you watch the news of the last week, the different social media companies came out together and talked about some Iranian threat actors, and they called the group, I think it was Tortoiseshell, and it was all about the creation of inauthentic or fake accounts on these different social media apps for the purposes of initiating communication with individuals, particularly within the U.S. military, for the purposes of creating of threat activity. And so you've got this dynamic, which is you've got more communication, more accounts than you have in the email world, yet less protection that's in place. So this is a really urgent kind of priority. And then one more layer just to add to it is, if it's my LinkedIn account, I'm also worried about my privacy. So whatever protection you have to provide, you have to balance the protection with the privacy aspect. So there's just a lot built up in that challenge. And I think organizations are just now facing it as they, as you go through healthcare and pharma, as they're just starting to make massive organization-wide adoption of these social networking apps.
So, Paul, I've often asked myself, if I was the CISO at a large organization or a chief security officer, what is it that I'd be worried about? And thankfully, I've never had to answer that question. And, I'd like to be an NFL quarterback. That's not going to happen. And I'm not going to become a CISO. I admire you and the people who are able to do what you do. But the one thing that I think about, are just the number of devices, of phones that people are walking around. I mean, in your organization, in any large organization, everybody nowadays is like this, glued to the phone and, constantly typing, and there's a lot of mobile chat going on. How do you secure that, and how, concerned are you about those individual devices that are floating around the organization?
It definitely is a concern. And to go back to a point I made earlier, it's a balance, because we also know that there's opportunities. For example, our nurses carry mobile phones in their pockets that enable them to get immediate access to, test results and so forth, alerts coming from their patients. So on one hand, we're trying to take advantage of it. And on the other hand, you've got, my team trying to, hold on, everybody, let's do this the right way. Let's make sure that we're not creating risk at the same time that we think that we're doing something great for our care of patients. So it's a challenge for sure. And we do, like you specifically mentioned, mobile chat. I mean, we've got enterprise apps that we try to direct our users to use, and if their needs are not being met by them, we work together with our IT organization to see what we can do to improve them. But I don't think there's any doubt that we do have users who are jumping across to others that are kind of outside the bounds of what we know about. And security is a concern. Part of it is fear of the unknown. If we haven't vetted, we don't know what level of security they have. We don't know who's taking ownership of that data and those types of questions, the privacy concerns that Jim just mentioned. So I think the expansion of work from home has probably increased it. And the fact that, especially in healthcare, I'm sure it's this way in other industries as well, but in healthcare, we really have to work with a network of outside organizations. And a lot of times our enterprise applications don't extend beyond our walls. So our users are looking for a way that they can work with that analytics firm that we're working with, or this government agency that we have to communicate with, or, this organization doing clinical trials for us. So it's, again, this business need, and how do we meet it in a way, providing a framework that enables us to do it in a way that makes our colleagues productive and effective in what they're trying to do, and at the same time not creating new risks that the organization is going to suffer negative consequences from.
So, Jim, if there's one thing that's just exploding, and I can't think of another word, it would be collaboration tools, talking about Teams and Slack, and of course we can include Zoom there. I don't know how much of that is driven by the pandemic and how much is just a natural evolution taking advantage of these tools, but it's off the charts. Are CISOs and security teams taking the security threat more seriously now that we have this mass population using the tools?
Yeah, so big news on that front today, by the way. The Slack is now part of Salesforce.com effective a couple of hours ago. So it's a really timely topic. But in general, to answer your question, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the conversations that we're having now with information security professionals in terms of how serious they are taking the adoption of these platforms and the recognition that they are not just communication platforms, but they are platforms that people are conducting their work on a regular basis, and that's across industries. You know, as Paul was referencing a few moments ago, you've got this dynamic where these platforms are not just a vehicle into an organization for a threat actor, but they are also already the targets of the exploits that are out there. We were talking to a casino operator a week ago, and we got on to their meeting platform of choice. And, one of our professionals on the call with them brought up something where they said, oh, well, we'll send you a file in the meeting to answer a question that they had. And the person said, yeah, sure, do that. And then our person on the call said, no, wait. We're actually not going to send you a file, but we're saying this to illustrate to you just how much these platforms are vehicles by which files and links and the like that can be transited. And so that's a big issue. And if you think about the hacks that have been talked about in the last couple of weeks, EA, Colonial Pipeline, a collaboration platform, was a centerpiece of both of those. One, it was an exploit in terms of the communication that was used for social engineering for access, further on access. The other one, the platform was used outbound as the command and control. So these are platforms that are being used heavily by the users, and they are platforms that are being recognized by, whether it's a Russian threat actor or a cyber criminal who could be anywhere in the world, as a great means, unfortunately, of entree into these organizations.
So, Paul, I have to, go back to enterprise apps and ask you, are we taking them for granted at this point? Can we worry less about security around enterprise apps, assume we've done, what we should have, or is this still a pressing challenge at large organizations?
I definitely think it is. I would be surprised if any CSO told you that they weren't still worried about their enterprise apps. And it's easy to chase a shiny thing. It's almost like we're playing whack-a-mole with all these new things that we have to keep up with. But if you forget about keeping your enterprise applications in focus as well, it can really turn around and bite you. And I think you both know this as well as me, the speed and the scope of discovery of new vulnerabilities and new types of attacks, the level of sophistication, the bar just keeps going up. So where you stood 2 years ago, you may have been very comfortable, but if you're at that same level today, you no longer have that level of comfort. You just can't stand pat on anything. You have to have a cycle of constantly revisiting and testing and staying up against the latest trends and making sure that you're raising the bar along with the way that the risk keeps going up.
So Jim, Paul heads up security at one of our nation's largest organizations. They're a gigantic healthcare provider. When your company looks at that space, how important is it and why?
Yeah, it's a big vertical focus for our organization, and it comes from a bunch of different aspects. One is the network aspect that Paul was talking about a few minutes ago, where if you think about healthcare, you've got the patient, you've got the provider, you've got the insurance layer, you've got the device layer. There is so much complexity to the network that provides healthcare organizations. And that means that there's so much communication that needs to take place. So we look for industries where there's a ton of communication as one of the big markets for where we're trying to apply what we're doing in the world, whether it's protecting Slack or it's protecting LinkedIn and the like. And I would tell you, it's interesting with healthcare in general. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have predicted that Slack would be a big platform, for example, where healthcare organizations are using it to conduct their business on a regular basis. So it's a big and important industry for us because of the nature of the problems they're solving and how they're solving it, and that there's a lot of communication that's taking place. We're going to HIMSS this year for the first time, and it's really a sign of continuing investment in the healthcare industry and in understanding that supply chain better than we have in the past. And the other layer that I'll add to it is we believe that one of our kind of secret weapons at Safeguard Cyber, and I say it out loud as a secret weapon, so there's some irony there, is that protection for privacy, the ability of how do you protect while respecting privacy. And you cannot think of an industry where that balance is more important than the healthcare industry. And so we really feel a great match between what we're doing and what the healthcare industry is looking for. So that's a lot of what really attracts us.
So Paul, I'd certainly like to hear from you any observations about special challenges specific to healthcare, but I'd also like to hear a little bit about some of the smaller and mid-sized healthcare organizations where they don't have the privilege of a CISO or a CSO in many cases, and they certainly don't have the budgets and the staff that the larger healthcare organizations do, and they're very budget challenged, yet, they're dealing with some of the same security issues.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason over the past year you've seen so many attacks on healthcare. As Jim said a moment ago, it's a very complex environment, and one of the unique challenges that we have is that at the end of the wire may be a device that's hooked up to a patient. So there's potentially human lives at stake, and that just raises the risk level of everything associated with how we utilize technology. We of course have the same pressures and goals as everyone else in terms of do more faster, more efficiently, and wanting to empower that. But if you think about the categories of tools and applications that we've been discussing here, there's a whole nother set of them that are specific to the healthcare environment. And again, they're typically built and used with the best of intentions, but oftentimes they don't have security top of mind. So when you add that dynamic in with that dynamic of, that could be something that affects a patient, it just increases the importance of making sure that we're using these things within a framework that looks at what the potential risks are and puts the right controls in place. And that's a really big challenge, even in an organization like mine, where we've got a team that does it. For smaller organizations, we do a lot of sharing of information. The Health ISAC and other organizations try to give everybody a chance to be part of the discussion and sharing best practices and things like that. But it is definitely a challenge. And Jim talked about privacy. I hadn't even said the word compliance yet, but that's another factor that is a big organizational consideration when you're in a healthcare organization. So trying to make all these pieces fit together without invoking, these draconian measures and being the security guy who's always saying no to things, and instead is, being collaborative and getting people on board and working together with you is the big challenge. And that's the way we've always tried to approach it, but it's a daily challenge for sure.
Well, Paul, Jim, the conversation was so insightful. I learned a lot here, and I know that our viewers will. So thank you both for joining us so much, and I hope we can have you both back on with us again shortly.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Hope to see you guys at HIMSS.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime Magazine. Joining us today was Jim Zuffoletti, CEO and co-founder at Safeguard Cyber. the industry's first and only comprehensive collaboration, chat, and social media security platform. To learn more about Safeguard Cyber, visit safeguardcyber.com. Also joining was Paul Connelly, Vice President and Chief Security Officer at HCA Healthcare. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.